Okay, cool. We'll go ahead and get started. Sure, some more will trickle in. But I've got some special visitors tonight. This is Steve and Maria Seibert. They were practically like my aunt and uncle growing up at Flint Church of Christ, where my dad preaches, and I think they were just passing through, so they stopped in and said hello, and they're going to be here tonight studying with us. And I'm trusting that Steve will have some valuable input, and you will, on this stuff. So, previous lessons we've gone through why God, or why believe in God, and we talked about some of the apologetics and some of the evidences for God, and then we transitioned into why believe in the Bible, and we talked about the Bible's authenticity, and we talked about the early manuscripts and the Bible's fluidity, and a lot of other evidences for why we believe in the Bible, and then just the overall message of the Bible. And so those were the first 5 weeks that we did. We did 2 or 3 weeks in the evidences of God, and then 2 weeks in the evidences of the Bible, and then now we're getting into week 6, which is why Jesus. So we'll spend a couple of weeks in why we believe in Jesus, and then we will get into why the church, why more specifically why the Church of Christ. And so that's kind of an overview of what we're going to be doing the next couple of weeks. All right, so why Jesus, part 1. I want us to watch this video. Now, I've watched it several times, and it's the Bible Project, and so sometimes the Bible Project is really, really good, and sometimes it has some things that are questionable. I think this one does a pretty good job explaining it, and then we can talk about it after. So we're going to watch a short video introduction on...
There's this crazy story at the beginning of the Bible. We have Adam and Eve, and they're in the Garden of Eden.
And everything in this garden is great. It's exactly as it should be, except there's this one tree that they're told by God not to eat from because it's dangerous and it will kill them.
So that's it. Avoid this fruit tree and we're fine.
Right, it seems pretty simple. But in this garden, there's a snake, and it starts telling a different story. It says that if you eat of this tree, it's not going to kill you. In fact, it's going to make you become like God.
And Adam and Eve, they believe the snake, and they eat the fruit.
And because of this, the goodness of the garden is tragically lost, and evil and death enters into God's good world.
Now, why is there a talking snake in the garden? I mean, this thing is a problem.
Yeah, it's very strange. And even more strange is the fact that the Bible doesn't say why or how this thing even got there. It just presents the snake as this creature who's in rebellion against God and that wants to get other people to doubt God's goodness and lead them on a path towards death. And so whatever this snake is, it's the source of evil that pervades our world and our lives, even still today.
But there is some hope, because right here in the story, God makes this really interesting promise to Adam and Eve.
That someone is going to come in the future, a son of Eve. And this guy's going to come and he's going to crush the serpent's head and destroy evil at its source. However, during this battle, the serpent is going to bite this guy's heel.
So it's like a mutual destruction.
Yeah, it's this very strange but beautiful promise. And it's just left hanging there until the next key moment in the story, when God singles out this guy named Abraham and says that through his family, goodness and blessing is going to be restored back to all of the nations of the world. And as we follow this family, we get to one of Abraham's great-grandsons, this guy named Judah. And he receives this promise that a king is going to come from his line, and that the whole world's going to follow this king, and he's going to bring peace and harmony, and there'll be lots of food and wine and milk and vineyards, and it's going to be awesome.
The first king that we meet from the line of Judah is a guy named King David. And he's a hero. Maybe he is the snake crusher.
But it turns out that David is infected with the same evil as the rest of humanity. He never crushes the snake, just the opposite. However, God makes a promise to David that this king is going to eventually come from his line. But as you go on in the story, one by one, each generation of his sons, they're just total chumps. They give into the snake, they choose evil, they go after money and sex and power and following other gods.
Things get so bad that they run the nation of Israel right into the ground, and the big bad empire of Babylon just takes them out.
And so now there are no more kings to even fulfill this promise.
So it seems like the whole plan is lost.
But during these dark days, there's this crazy group of guys called prophets. And they just kept talking about this coming king and reminding us of the promise that he'll come, he'll defeat evil, he'll restore the garden. Now, one specific prophet, Isaiah, he tells us more about why this king is bitten. Isaiah says that the promised king receives this wound because of humanity's evil, and that it kills him. But then all of a sudden he comes back. And Isaiah says it's because he suffered this wound that he can now become a source of healing to other people.
But the Old Testament ends, and the snake-crushing king that everyone's been talking about never shows up.
And this is why, when the New Testament begins, it introduces us to Jesus of Nazareth, not as some random guy, but as someone who comes to fulfill these specific ancient promises.
We learn that he's from the line of David, Judah, and Abraham.
And he goes around Israel announcing that the goodness of God's kingdom is here, now. And he begins confronting the effects of evil on people by healing them, by forgiving them of their sins and evil.
Many people are now believing that this is, in fact, the promised king.
But Jesus began telling his closest followers that he was going to become king and bring peace by taking the full effect of humanity's evil into himself.
The fatal snake bite wound.
Exactly. And so it seems like the serpent wins. And this story actually would be a tragedy except for what happens next. Jesus rises from the dead.
And now Jesus has the power over evil and death for himself.
And so the rest of the New Testament is then making this claim that Jesus' power over evil and death has now become available to us to begin confronting the effects of evil in our life.
But even still, death and evil are a real problem in our world all around us.
And so the story of the Bible ends by describing this future day when Jesus...
Alright, so that kind of gives you a visual of what we're going to be talking about. And it really starts in the beginning. That's where I wanted to start. The beginning of the Bible in Genesis, when you have the fall of humanity, where you have Adam and Eve that sin. Okay, and so it talked about the snake here. We understand the snake to be Satan, and because Adam and Eve sinned, there's this great need for us to have a mediator, and that's what we're going to be talking about in Jesus. What did y'all think about the video? Any comments? Any discussion? Anything that you had a question about, maybe? I cut it off a little short because I think the last 20 seconds it kind of alluded to like a rapture, 1,000 year. So I cut it a little short. But we'll go ahead and get back into, if there's no comments, we'll get back into the slideshow presentation. Alright, now who was Jesus? Okay, so I think from the faces that I'm seeing in here that most of us, have a general idea and know Jesus very well. But you look at the picture up here. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, raised in Nazareth. So this is over, you see the Mediterranean Sea right there. You've got Israel on this side, and then towards this direction, you've got Palestine, you've got Egypt right there. So right in that Mediterranean region, a man is born by the name of Jesus of Nazareth. Okay. Well, he was a carpenter by trade. Okay. And so when Jesus came, he didn't have this real, wonderful, luxurious, or this cool job or whatever. He was just a simple carpenter. He started his ministry around the age of 30 and performed miracles and taught people for 3 years. So you can read stories in the Gospels about Jesus before he was 30 years old and in the temple as a boy. But he starts his ministry and about the age of 30, and he ministers and does miracles and heals people and spreads the message and the gospel for 3 years. Okay. He was crucified by the Jews under the authority of the Roman government. So at this point in time, the nation of Israel, the Jews were under the authority of the Romans. The Romans had conquered half the world. And so you've got the Jews who are under the Roman authority. And the Jews didn't like Jesus. They wanted to have him killed. Okay. And so they take him to someone of authority, and that Roman authority gives him permission or allows them to kill Jesus. Okay, so now that's the story. Now, we believe it to be miraculous, and for those people in society that might say, well, this is just a made-up story, something fabricated. Yeah, you've got it in your Bible, right? But that's just a mythological book anyways. Okay, that's what they might say. But really, the proof about Jesus' existence is undeniable. You've got multiple sources of works that aren't the Bible that talk about Jesus' existence and talk more specifically about Jesus' impact and his followers. And you can read about this in the annals of Tacitus, okay, who was a historian of Rome. And Tacitus wasn't someone who was on the Jews' side. He thought the Jews were a problem. He thought the Christians were a problem. And so he wasn't on Christ's side. But he does recognize that there was a Christ, that he did die, okay, and that there are some very convicted people called Christians. Tacitus recognizes that. Josephus goes even further. So Josephus is a historian, not a believer in Christ. Okay, he was a Jewish historian, and he references Jesus as he claims that he said, I don't even know if I can call Jesus a man because of all the wonderful, miraculous things that Jesus did. Josephus writes about that and talks about it, and then references some of the same events that we read in our Bible. So there are other forms of verification that Jesus existed, right, other than the Bible. But we know that we are focusing on the Bible and what the Bible has to say about Jesus. Okay. Now, what does the Bible say about Jesus? Okay, so Mark chapter 1, verse 11. We'll flip over there real quick. Got any volunteer readers?
Like 1:11.
1:11, Mark 1:11.
There came a voice from heaven saying, Thou art my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased.
All right, so this is God speaking here in the Gospel of Mark, and he says, as Jesus has been baptized, he says, this is my beloved Son, with whom I'm well pleased. All right, so the Bible immediately recognizes, and God immediately recognizes that this Jesus character, not Jesus of Nazareth, is his Son. Okay, let's go to Mark 14. Mark 14, 61 and 62.
But he kept silent and did not answer. Again, the high priest was questioning him and saying to him, Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus said, I am, and you shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power, coming with the clouds of heaven.
Right, so here is Jesus as he's on trial, openly saying, I'm the Son of God. I am God's Son. And then in John 3:16, we all can probably quote that. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever should believe in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. Okay, so the Bible claims that this carpenter that is a historical character, this carpenter, this Nazarene, Jesus of Nazareth, is the Son of God. That's what the Bible says. And so can't separate that. The Bible clearly states that Jesus is God's Son. Now, you've got other religions that try to claim that Jesus was just a good prophet or a good man. I think even maybe the religion of Islam believes that he was a good prophet or a prophet. I'm not sure about that. But I always go back to what C.S. Lewis wrote in Mere Christianity. He says, look, Jesus can't be a good teacher if he's a liar, right? He's either a liar, he's either a lunatic, or he's either the Lord. Okay? And we know Jesus to be the Lord, right? But you can't separate. If Jesus says that he's the Son of God, and you say, I don't believe that, he was just a good teacher, right? Is someone that's a liar? Are they a good teacher? And so you can't really separate that from the Bible. The Bible clearly states, and Jesus claims himself, that he was the Son of God. Okay? The first time that we encounter Jesus in the Bible is not just when he appears in the New Testament. Alright? So, from the very beginning of time, okay, Jesus was God. Okay? And let's read it in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Who will be wanting to read that? Steve.
Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.
All right, so, and I don't know this written in Hebrew or Greek. I don't know what terminology it uses, but right here it says, let us make man our own image. So you get the sense of this plurality of God here in Genesis, right? And then you go to the prophets, as it talked about in the video. Okay, in Isaiah, talks about this king that's coming, this man that's going to die for our transgressions, going to be pierced for our transgressions, and all of these prophecies that are written about Jesus in the Old Testament. Jesus doesn't just appear in the New Testament; he appears from the very beginning. Okay, and let's read John chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, and it's going to help us. It's going to further explain this. John 1 through 5.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that had been made. In him was life, and that was life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.
Okay. All right, so see the word here. What is the word here? Who is the word here? You see that W is capitalized.
God.
All right, more specifically, Jesus.
You think about verse 14, or are you going to bring that up next? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
And then verse 14. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. Okay, so it answers it for us right there. Okay. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Right? And we have seen his glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. So the Word here is Jesus. Okay? And John says, in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And so, Jesus was a part of the Godhead from the very beginning. And so, we don't just recognize him as being this character that comes up out of nowhere. But from the very beginning, God had this in his plan. All right, now, what did Jesus do? Okay, Okay, so we understand that Jesus is the Son of God. What did he do? Genesis chapter 3. Let's go over there. Let's go over to Genesis chapter 3. Okay, so here you got the fall of man. So you can kind of see this picture now. We don't know what it really looked like, but we get a visual image in the Bible. But this is just something I found on the internet. Okay, they're living in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve are living in the Garden of Eden. All right, and this place is beautiful. Okay, it's perfect. Everything's provided for. Okay, they don't have any problems in this garden. God has just completely laid it out there for them to have this wonderful, perfect life, right? But He gives them some instruction, and He tells them, you don't eat of this specific tree. Okay, don't eat of this tree. If you do, then you're surely going to die, right? And we see this character come about, as we've seen in the video, the snake, right? And we understand the snake, the serpent, to be Satan. And he tempts Eve. And Eve takes the fruit, and she eats of it, and then gives it to her husband Adam. Okay, and they both realize that they've done something wrong, and they realize that they're unclothed and they're not decent, and so God confronts them about it, right? And they hesitate, and they lie, and they beat around the bush, right? But at the end of the day, that sin has separated them from God. Okay, and so chapter 3 talks about the fall. And how, as mankind, when we sin, we are separated from God. Now, in God's law, if you sin, then you deserve to die, right? Or you die. Okay? Now, throughout the... there's just some more visual images. Sin separates us from God. The whole world is separated from God. However, God sacrifices His Son so that the whole world might be saved, all right, through Jesus. All right, here we go. So why did we need Jesus to die for our sins? So God's law equals punishment for sin. Okay? So would everybody agree in here that we've all sinned at some point in time? We've all done something that was wrong and something that was against God's will. If you don't raise your hand and you think you're perfect, then I need an autograph, or you might just be delusional.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Why do you think He put that tree in the garden in the first place? To test their faith?
That's a good question. See.
I would say it this way, to give them a choice.
Free will.
Yeah, if He doesn't have anything they can do that could be wrong, then they never have a choice whether or not to obey God or to love God. Because, love and obedience are kind of hand in hand there with God.
Right. So if they're mindless servants and they don't have any free will, how can you really have a relationship? Is that kind of where you're going in the direction?
I don't think there's much glory in that either. I mean, that's their only option. So.
I mean, they would be forced.
Right. Very good. Yeah, so that kind of answers your question there, Jen. If they didn't have any free will, if they didn't have an option, how can they show their obedience?
Yeah, I'm kind of dumb when it comes to the Bible.
No, you're not.
I just started my journey.
No, hey.
I know some of these questions sound kind of ridiculous.
No, that was a really good question. You notice how I gave it to him real fast. I don't want to answer. That was a really good question. So yeah, God's law. If we sin against God's law, then we disobey Him. We deserve to be punished, right? We deserve punishment. Okay, kind of like of the legal system today. If you break the law, I mean, I know our laws today pretty much do whatever you want, but if you break the law today, then you're gonna pay a penalty for it. Just like God's law. If you break God's law, you're going to pay a penalty for that, right? But when you sin and you separate yourself from God, right? That's not something that you can just serve your time and then everything goes away and you get to, right? That's a penalty that someone has to pay. And we know that in the Old Testament, who paid for the sins of the people, or who kind of sort of atoned for those sins? It was sacrifices, animal sacrifices. So they would bring these animals to the altar, and the animal will be slain, and that would be the sacrifice for their wrongdoings. Okay. Now, that law was only in effect for so long until God sent His own Son to die for humanity as a whole. And so in the New Testament, that sacrifice, the sacrifice for your sin. So if you remember, everybody raised their hand, or said they would raise their hand, that they've committed sin before. So you deserve to die. You deserve the death penalty. All right, you deserve punishment. Okay, but Jesus stepped in and said, "I am sacrificing myself." And God said, "I'm sending my Son Jesus to sacrifice Himself so that He can take the punishment for you." Okay, and so that's why we revert back to Jesus so much about everything, wanting to be like Him, wanting to love like Him, wanting to imitate Him, and wanting to love Him and Him to love us is because of what He did for us. Is He gave us His life, and
Okay, can I add a little more to the question a while ago about why did God put the tree there?
yeah, absolutely.
Because it'd be easy for someone to say, well, if God put that tree there, then He was tempting man. And I don't think God was tempting man. And of course, the Bible says God does not tempt. Okay, so we know that. But God put the tree there, and the temptation did not come from God. In fact, He said, "Don't eat of it. Eat it, you're going to die." Does that sound like He's trying to tempt them?
No, right.
Okay, I mean, that's warning them, So He didn't tempt them. The temptation came from man, because the Bible teaches us that it's our own desires, our own lust, that cause us to do things that are contrary to God's will.
Right.
And so whether it's pride or, whenever I read the story of Adam and Eve, I try to think of all the different reasons why they might have been subject to that temptation, why they might actually, say, okay, yeah, that's a good idea. I think I'll bite that fruit that I was told not to bite, And part of it was that the serpent told Adam and Eve that if they ate of it, they'd be like God.
Mm.
Well, what greater person do these two know than God? I mean, you get the idea from chapter 3 that God goes walking in the middle of the day sometimes and just walking and talking with them, and He's all they know, and He's so wonderful. Why would you not want to be like Him?
Well, I didn't think about it that way.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting.
And so I don't know if it was an evil desire. I mean, as powerful as God. I want to be not a friend of God, but a contender against God. I don't know if it's that. I think maybe it's just, I want to be all that He is. But the Bible doesn't tell us exactly what it was about that they were shooting for. We have to kind of, I guess, settle that in our own minds a little bit.
Right, I've never thought of it that way. I've always thought of it, the second thing that you mentioned about how they were being like, "Oh, I want to be as powerful as God." I've never thought of it as maybe they wanted to be like this wonderful person that met like their best friend.
You don't always sin with bad intentions. Like a lot of the sins are done with good intentions. Like I don't
Well, that's
think
the truth is ruthless.
I don't think they intended to hurt it. I mean, it said that, didn't He say that they would know the difference between good and evil? And I mean, they did. Once they ate it, they knew evil and they knew good before that they didn't. But I mean, I don't think people don't always sin with, not every sin is murder and lying. And, sometimes you lie because you feel like you would help somebody more.
was serving God by killing Christians and persecuting people the way. But he finally realized God helped him realize the truth.
We also saw God and Satan spar over somebody else in the Old Testament too. And God laid down ground rules for Satan and said, "You can't do anything to kill him." With Job, of course, and then Job, so they battled through time with each other, and God's always had these ground rules with him. And Job, unlike Adam and Eve, didn't sin, and he was blessed far better than he had ever had it before, because he chose, not to turn his back on God. So Satan's ruthless. I mean, he's not out to see how gentle he can make you sin. He's out to win your soul.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. So,
Maybe it's a little bit more simple than that. Maybe they did it because they were told not to do it. I mean, isn't that what people do sometimes? You can't do this. Well, you watch me.
Yeah, those are all good comments. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, even in today's time, going back to Ash's point, even in today's time, just because you believe in something and you believe it strongly, that doesn't make it true. Okay, like the Muslim that's willing to blow himself up and kill other people, he believes. I mean, he believes in what he's doing. But at the end of the day, okay, it's not the truth, and it's still sin. It's not what he's supposed to do. And so that may have been, Adam and Eve may have had pure intentions, like you said, but at the end of the day, we just need to obey God and take ourselves come out of the equation. Just do what God says. Those are very good comments. Very good thoughts. All right, so another purpose of this is as we talked about Jesus and who he was from a human standpoint, that he was a historical character in AD from I guess it was 83 to 33 or somewhere around there. I might be missing it, but he was a carpenter of Nazareth, so we know that, and then we know from the Bible that he was the Son of God. I also wanted to talk about what does he teach, right? Because that's extremely important. What does he teach, and how does he tell us how to live our life, and how do we become a part of him and his body? And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about. Anybody got a time?
About 10 minutes.
6:34, perfect. All right, so let's take a look at some of the things that Jesus teaches and how he expects us to live. Let's go to Matthew chapter 5. So your minds probably immediately recognize that this is a Sermon on the Mount. One of my professors at Free Norman, he had a topic assigned to him, and it was like, I think that it was just Jesus is Lord, or Jesus is why Jesus is the Lord. And he made some really good points that when I listened to this sermon, I hadn't really looked at it this way. But, why did people go to their deaths saying that they believed in Jesus in the first century, when otherwise they could have survived? Okay? Or another thing is, why did they obey these teachings that Jesus told them? Are these easy teachings to obey in this time period? Or really any time? Are these easy teachings? You think about his teachings in today's society. Don't divorce. Right? don't have sex outside of marriage. Are those things people want to hear?
No.
People don't want to, and people didn't want to hear that back then. Okay, so I think a little bit further evidence about looking at Christians in the first century and how they accepted his teachings, and it's not because they agreed with his teachings, but they obeyed his teachings because they knew that he was the Son of God. And so, when we read the Bible, when we read Jesus' teaching, should we skim through it and say, "Oh, I agree with that," or "I agree with that," "I agree with that," and then, is that how we need to read Jesus' teachings? Based off of just that, well, me and Jesus reached the same conclusions. All right, so I'm going to do those. No. All right. We need to obey Jesus' teachings because they are Jesus' teachings, regardless of whether we like them or agree with them or anything like that. Okay? And so, as we kind of go through some of these teachings and talk about what Jesus expects of us, keep that in mind, that these might not be easy to take. All right? I know some of them I read, and I'm like, why did he have to put that in there? That's hard. But regardless, he expects us to do that. All right, so we'll just get into the Beatitudes at the very beginning. Can someone read chapter 5, verses 2 through 4? Matthew 5, 2 through 4.
And he began to teach them, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted."
Okay, so what do these verses mean? Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. What does that even mean? I had that explained to me kind of like this. To be poor in spirit is it's like you understand that you're in need of God's grace. That you need God. Does anybody have anything to add to that, or do they agree or disagree with it?
When there's parts that I don't understand, I go to the easy to read version. I mean, I know that's on like a third grade level, but it says that to those that know they're spiritually in need.
Okay, very good. I think that helps us understand a little bit better. Okay, so, well, our culture, it's I'm a self-made man, okay, and I'm proud of it. I pick myself up by my own boots, and I'm independent, and teaching right here might be hard for us to take. Blessed are those who understand that they really need God. They really need God's grace. That they are in need. Verse 4, it says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." What do y'all think this what do you think this means? I know it point blank, but maybe if you put it in different words, that blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted.
Does it mean that we'll see our loved ones again? Is that what it means? Maybe.
I think this has more to do with like sin, like correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's like godly sorrow over sin. What do y'all think?
I think that if you're right about that, then you're looking at the only religion in the world that has an answer for that. Because nobody, whether it was Allah or Confucius or anybody else, actually offered a solution for our sin. They offered great thoughts, Confucius and some of his stuff and some of Jesus' stuff, right in line with each other, But for all the great thoughts and all the ideologies they could present, can have a solution for that sin. We need to be forgiven. And Jesus says there's a way. And you can have that sorrow, that guilt removed, and you can find comfort. I think that fits Scripture. I'm not sure if that's what it means right there or not, but it fits.
Right, yeah. No, I think that's really good explanation. Right, that we understand how we don't really have an answer for our own sins, but He comforts us by what He gives in Jesus in that sacrifice. All right, 5 through 7. We'll get through the Beatitudes and then we'll wrap it up. 5 through 7. Who wants to read 5 through 7?
Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy.
All right, so going to that verse 5. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. What's a synonym for meek?
Mine says gentle.
Gentle, humble. I think both of those are good. Gentleness, humility. For they shall inherit the earth. Those are the people that are going to inherit the earth. Those who are gentle and humble and have self-control. That's who's going to inherit the earth. Wow, is that a contrast from what our society teaches us? I want to have the most money. I want to be the most famous. I want to have the biggest house and drive the fastest car, and I want to be the coolest and the most powerful and the best at this and that. It's a hard teaching for some people to take. That's not who's going to inherit the earth. It's those who are meek, those who are gentle, those who are humble. That's who's going to inherit the earth. So do you kind of see that if people really did believe Jesus was the Son of God, like, why would they obey these commands and go to their death obeying these commands and professing that Jesus was Christ? It doesn't make a lot of sense. That's undeniable proof of Jesus being the Son of God and being who these people thought He was, and that's why they listened and obeyed Him. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Okay? What do you think about this?
The Amplified version kind of breaks it down and gives you like little breakdowns of simplifying it. And it says those who actively seek right standing with God.
Okay, seek right standing with God. That's what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Seek right, okay.
So they're trying their best to follow his commandments and word.
Okay. All right. The idea of hunger and thirst, right? You desire something to eat, or you desire something to drink, like that desire. All right. Blessed are those who that's what they're living for. That's their desire. Is they're living for righteousness. They want to be righteous, so they will be satisfied. All right, verse 7. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall be that they shall receive mercy. I think this is pretty self-explanatory right here. If you show mercy, all right, you're going to receive mercy. Okay. How you forgive or how you show mercy is how you're going to be forgiven or how you are going to be shown mercy. Whatever standard you're going to use, right? It's going to be applied back to you. All right, verses 8 through 10. It says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Okay, so going back to verse 8. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. This idea of purity, purity of heart, wanting to do the right thing, doing the right thing. Verse 9, blessed are the peacemakers, they shall be called sons of God. Okay? That's what we're called to be peacemakers. How many of us in reflection can say that 100% of the time we've tried to be a peacemaker? I know, not with my sisters. I wasn't trying to be a peacemaker all the time. I try to get things stirred up. I try to get them in trouble. But in a more serious sense, are you a peacemaker in your house, at work, out in the community? That's a description. That's a characteristic that you gotta have. That's what Jesus says. You gotta be a peacemaker to be called sons of God. All right, in 10, 11, and 12, I'll read this real quick because I think we're running out of time. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. All right, so you get this idea of persecution. What's persecution?
Persecution is when you suffer at the hands of others because of what you believe and practice.
Yeah. So it says, blessed are those who are persecuted, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Do you think that in America we've endured any, you know what I mean? Do you think we've endured any real persecution to the effect that these people have? Now, you might have in terms of maybe your family has disowned you, or you have some form of persecution, right? But these people right here, they were being burned at the stake. They were being rounded up and murdered for their beliefs, right? And so he's saying, look, if you're persecuted for righteousness' sake, look, you're going to have the kingdom of heaven, right? It's not a bad thing to be persecuted, right? It says, blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. And that's what we see later in the Gospels, how the apostles, after they were imprisoned and beaten, that they rejoiced that they were counted worthy to suffer for Christ's sake. Okay? So persecution is something that, I don't think God looks down and says, well, I'm glad that my servant is getting beaten, right? But it shows your conviction, and it shows how much you love and care and want to obey Him. Okay? All right. So we're going to stop there. We've got, I think it's either 1 or 2 more weeks on why Jesus. And so we'll pick up more next class period this time next week, Sunday night. Any prayer requests?